The views and opinions of the following show do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of News Talk 1450 WOL, Radio 1 Incorporated, or their management.
This is Montgomery Mosaic on 1450 WOL, WPRS, HD2, and worldwide on WOLDCnews.com. Montgomery Mosaic features topics of interest to Montgomery County residents, businesses, and visitors. Here now is your host, Deborah Milo.
Good morning, County friends, and thank you for tuning into another edition of Montgomery Mosaic. Well, spring is finally here, and you know what that means? It means warmer temperatures, but it also means more people will spend time outdoors. Washington area transportation officials urge drivers, bicyclists, and pedestrians to make that extra effort to watch out for each other. Well, today, my guest is Jeff Dunkel, and Jeff is Montgomery County's answer to that whole situation. He's the Pedestrian Safety Coordinator with the county's Department of Transportation. Jeff is responsible for implementing the county executive's Pedestrian Safety Initiative, which is pretty much a strategic plan which makes the county's roads safer for pedestrians and bicyclists. He's here today to talk about the latest Street Smart campaign, which is a regional pedestrian and bicycle education and enforcement campaign, which was launched on March 23rd. You've probably seen this campaign's tired faces images on buses, on benches, and all that. Well, people with tired tracks across their faces, you can see all of that throughout the Washington metropolitan area. So enough about that. Jeff, welcome to Montgomery Mosaic. It's really good to see you.
Thanks, Deb. It's great to be here today.
Listen, tell our listeners a little about yourself and your years with the county.
Well, I've been with Montgomery County actually since 1990, but back in 2001, I was working in transit services for the ride-on bus system and responsible for passenger facilities. That was the time at which then County Executive Doug Duncan put together a blue ribbon panel chaired by Bill Braunrott, a legislator at Maryland, and they came up with a plan to try to address how to make pedestrians and bicyclists safer in the entire state, but specifically Montgomery County. Mm-hmm. I was asked to join that group in 2001, so I was part of the original task force that helped identify how we could make pedestrians safer. The problem was we ended up with 54 recommendations with no real roadmap of how to make it happen.
Wow.
So the county executive in 2007, when Isaiah Leggett took office, he said, we need a strategic plan to figure out how to really make pedestrians and bicyclists safer in Montgomery County, because walkability and bikeability are really important for building community in our county. And so it's that work that I've been engaged in when I took the job as the Pedestrian Safety Coordinator in 2008.
Well, I, for one, as a Montgomery County citizen, am glad that you took the job.
Well, thank you, Deb. I'm pleased to be there.
So tell me, what makes this time of year particularly important for pedestrian safety?
Well, this is the time in which we come out of winter, and everybody's been indoors for the last 3 or 4 months and are eager to get out on the street.
Oh, yeah.
And especially with all the cherry blossoms and the beautiful time of year with green grass and birds chirping, people are out and about, and you can see the big increase these last 2 or 3 weeks we've had with pedestrian activity and bicycles. People are out there riding their bikes right now. As people, get out of their houses and, outside, get out of their living rooms and their homes, they need to be, particularly cautious. They may be out of practice of what they do when they're on the street. And so we're actually, trying to raise people's awareness of looking out for each other. Drivers need to be looking out for pedestrians. Mm-hmm. Pedestrians and bicyclists need to be looking out for their own safety and being cautious.
Wow. How big of an issue is pedestrian and bicycle safety right here in the Washington region?
Well, in fact, it's not only is it a huge issue for the region, but for the state of Maryland. The fact of the matter is that nearly 30% of all traffic fatalities are pedestrians. And we had actually 73 pedestrian fatalities in the Washington region last year and 3 bicycle fatalities. And so because of that, and in Maryland, it's actually approaching the same number. It's over 25% now of all fatalities affect pedestrians. With those sort of numbers, we know that if we want to reduce traffic fatalities, we need to be focusing on pedestrian and bicycle safety. And that's what brings us to the Street Smart campaign. This is a campaign that we launch twice a year. We do a campaign in the spring and a campaign in the fall. And we now are just in the middle of our spring campaign, where you probably have seen a lot of these images that have been out there trying to tell drivers and pedestrians what they need to be doing to try to be safe and make sure that everybody's safe.
County friends, you've tuned into Montgomery Mosaic with your host, Deborah Milo. And my guest today is Jeff Dunkel, Pedestrian Safety Coordinator with the county's Department of Transportation. We're having a good old-fashioned chinwag about pedestrian and bicycle safety, and we were just talking about the Street Smart program. Can you talk a little bit more about that program, Jeff?
Yes. The Street Smart campaign is part of we like to say that in pedestrian and bicycle safety, we address the 3 E's. Engineering improvements to make the roads safer with the infrastructure. But then, most importantly, we think, is the education and the enforcement, because we need to change behaviors. We can build all the crosswalks and all the safe facilities in the world, but if people are not behaving safely out there and following the traffic safety laws, then that's when bad things happen. So the purpose of Street Smart is to focus on the education and the enforcement activities. And so in these campaigns, we have a flurry of education that's coupled with enforcement actions on the street. Mm-hmm. And I can speak firsthand from Montgomery County. We used to do about 10 to 15 enforcement actions on the street each month. And we're now ramping that up to over 40 a month that we're going out there on the street with police officers, and we're basically citing people when they are breaking the law, whether they're jaywalking or crossing against the signal or not stopping for pedestrians and crosswalks. We're issuing pretty hefty fines for that. So the campaign for Street Smart takes this education campaign and couples it with enforcement action and with the expectation that will change behaviors. The good news is in Montgomery County, where we've done this, where we've targeted these efforts,
right,
we have seen a significant reduction in pedestrian collisions in those locations. So we believe as we do more of this, that we will continue to make things safer and have a reduction of collisions.
So tell me the 3 E's again.
Engineering,
mm-hmm,
education, and enforcement.
And you said that 30% of all accidents were pedestrian related?
Not all accidents. Yes, excuse me. Of all traffic fatalities. Actually, we're identifying fatalities. And in Montgomery County last year, we had 9 fatalities. We're a little concerned this year because we've already had 5. And so now those do tend to happen in clusters. Nobody seems to know why that is. So we're hopeful that we'll not have any more fatalities. It'd be great if we could not have any more fatalities for the rest of this year. But the reality is when we started the initiative back in 2008, we had about 18, 20 fatalities each year, and we're now down to 10 or less than 10. So
needless to say, the campaign is a huge success.
We believe that it is, yes. And we think that the Street Smart campaign is the regional campaign that's basically tying our efforts to what's happening in D.C. and as well as the Virginia suburban jurisdictions. And we do think that we do know that the pedestrian fatalities have also dropped for the region as well. We used to have close to 100 fatalities a year, and now we're down to 75 this last year.
I'm really interested about the campaign's Tired Faces images. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because that's a conversation starter. It has been for me and my circles.
Yes, we're quite pleased with this campaign that was first introduced. We're now actually entering the 3rd year of using this image. The idea that there are consequences to not being careful or not looking out for others. And the Tired Faces, somebody once criticized this as being a violent ad campaign, and I tried to say, well, this is an implied violence.
Yeah.
It's basically the idea that if you choose not to be careful or you choose not to be alert to pedestrians in the roadway, you very well might end up hurting somebody. And the fact that these folks are, images from all walks of life,
that's right.
It could be just about anybody. And in fact, in Montgomery County, several of the images we're now using are actually Montgomery County high school students. We launched a campaign this last summer. We call it YOLO, You Only Live Once, in the high schools. And we actually got about 50 high school students to pose for photography, and with this tired tracks across the face. We think it's attention getting, and we do know
yes.
we do know that for the most part it's been a very positive response to this campaign. We did have someone criticize us for blaming the victim, and we like to say, in the case of traffic safety, it's not about blaming people; it's about trying to get people to behave differently so that they're safer. And so, for that reason, half of our messages are targeted at pedestrians, and half of our messages are targeted at drivers. It's a two-way street. Both drivers and pedestrians have a responsibility to behave in a way that will keep everybody safe.
You just said something that's so key. You said the driver and the pedestrian have a responsibility. And that's something we were talking earlier in the green room. And that's something that, for some reason, just doesn't seem to happen with a lot of folks. We just, like I told you earlier, we just had a situation when I was coming in where a woman walked across the street with her child in arms through a parking lot, and it was not a crosswalk. She just walked across, not looking in either direction. And the assumption was that we were going to stop, which of course we did, but it's just that that's the assumption. It's as though that there's no responsibility for individuals on their own.
Debbie, you hit a very important point, and that is that it's interesting. I've been working on this issue now for over 10 years now. I've always found that people tend to like to blame the other side. So if you're a driver, if you see the world over your steering wheel, you tend to see the pedestrians who may not be doing, the right things. You just pointed out with this woman who crossed where she shouldn't have been.
Right.
And likewise, the pedestrians are oftentimes seeing drivers who aren't stopping for them in the crosswalk or yielding to them when they have a right to be crossing. One of the areas, that we find are of most concern in urbanized areas such as downtown Silver Spring, downtown Bethesda, or the District of Columbia, is that pedestrians are more often hit in crosswalks crossing with a light because the drivers did not yield to them. In contrast, out in the more suburban locations, sometimes pedestrians oftentimes may not be crossing in a crosswalk because there may not be a crosswalk. So, so we actually have a situation where, where people are doing things that can put themselves at risk or put others at risk. And so we're trying to say that what we need to do is not necessarily be trying to blame drivers or blame pedestrians, but take responsibility for each other. It is a village. It takes a village. And in this case, we need to be looking out for each other because you are your brother or sister's keeper. And if we're all looking out for each other and trying to stop for the pedestrian when they're in the crosswalk or even when they're not, in the case of them crossing, in an intersection,
right.
There's actually a right for the pedestrian to cross there if they're trying to cross that roadway at an intersection. And pedestrians should be stopped for by the cars. Likewise, drivers need to slow down. They need to basically, we find that when you hit somebody at 40 miles per hour, you have an over an 85% chance that person will be killed. When the speeds are slower of 30 and 25, it's the exact reverse, 85% of the time that they'll be living. So speed is a huge factor here, and it's very important that people be driving the posted speed limits. And, how many times do we see people driving aggressively and not doing that?
That's right.
Yeah. So, there's a series of tips, that we're trying to give people right now. One is to be sure to slow down and obey the speed limits. Look for people in the crosswalks or in the roadway and yield to pedestrians and bicyclists when they're there in the roadway. Be careful when passing stopped vehicles because oftentimes they'll be stopped for a pedestrian. In these multiple laned environments, one of the more tragic collisions that can happen is someone stops for a pedestrian, but the car in the lane next to them, blow right through there and they hit the pedestrian. So we've had that happen too many times. And always allow 3 feet of passing when you're passing a bicycle. It's a state law in the state of Maryland.
It is a state law.
Yes, and
You're right.
so, and likewise, the pedestrians need to be really trying to cross at the crosswalks wherever they exist. Adhere to the traffic signals. When that walk signal goes on, that's when you cross, not when it's red. And too often that happens. People end up crossing against the light, and that could be a hazard that will put them at risk of being hurt or killed. And then one of the more important issues that we identified last year was visibility. It is very hard to see pedestrians at night. Now, with daylight savings time here and being lighter later,
right.
Not as big of an issue right now as it is in the fall. However, that being said, anytime you're out, the visibility of being able to be seen by the driver is key to keeping you safe. And so we ask that people wear bright color clothing or something reflective. In the case of running wear and athletic wear, we're seeing a lot of this has reflective materials into it, integrated into it now. So we encourage people to be mindful of buying things that are reflective so the drivers can see you when their headlights hit you.
And see, that's so important. You have to be able to see people at night. Well, this is Montgomery Mosaic on 1450 WOL, and I'm your host, Deborah Milo, talking to Jeff Dunkel with the county's Department of Transportation about pedestrian and bicycle safety. Stay with us, folks. We'll be back in just a few moments. We're talking about pedestrian safety. Stay tuned.
WOL.
Good morning. This WOL Traffic Update is brought to you by the Foundation for a Better Life. On the Suitland Parkway inbound, right at the Beltway, left lane blocked for emergency road work. New York Avenue outbound at Fenwick Street, 2 left lanes closed for road work. It's only the right lane getting by, so it's very slow now. Outbound on New York Avenue heading through Northeast. Winston Churchill's words stirred his country in the face of defeat. Today they inspire us to reach for our own victories, commitment, pass it on. From the Foundation for a Better Life at Values.com. Now your WOL weather forecast brought to you by Stratford University. For today, could see some afternoon rain and thunderstorms, a high near 71, clearing overnight down to 41. Tomorrow, increasing clouds again and a high near 60. Let Stratford University help you find a career you'll love. Come to their open house Thursday, April 23rd. Visit stratford.edu/open house. Stratford University, changing lives one student at a time. Steve Hirschhorn for News Talk 1450 WOL, where information is power.
Welcome back, County Friends. It's Montgomery Mosaic, your host, Deborah Milo, on 1450 WOL. And I'm talking to Jeff Dunkel with the county's Department of Transportation. He's the Pedestrian and Bicycle Safety Coordinator, and we've got some really good information about how to be careful this summer, it's spring and summer. Watch out for folks, and let's take care of folks while we're out there. So, Jeff, we wanted to talk about distracted driving. That's a big one.
Yes,
you know?
what we're finding, Deb, is we're finding that distraction is playing an ever more significant role in pedestrian and bicycle collisions, as well as all traffic collisions. And in fact, we're now reporting this on our accident reports to try to identify when distraction is a factor. But the bottom line is, when you're out there walking on the street, you see it all the time. People are they have their heads down, they're looking at their cell phones, or they're wired in with their ears with their iPods.
Yes.
And listening to music. And that puts you in a bubble where you're not really aware of what's going on the street when that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And drivers are oftentimes driving erratically when they're distracted and paying attention to their cell phones or their iPods or whatever. And the fact now it's illegal to be texting or on the phone when you're driving the car.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have those laws yet for pedestrians. However, we did find last year, we do data analysis each year on the accident collisions, and what we found was there was a much higher incidence of pedestrians at fault in the 20-somethings and the teenagers in the 10 to 20 age group.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
Well, it did surprise us that it was as high as it was, but
Right.
I will tell you that when you stopped and thought about it, you say, who's using their smartphones? Who's using their iPods?
That's right.
And the fact is that age group that is very much has these devices. They understand them and they use them well.
Yes, they do.
Those of us that I'm 58, and I can tell you I'm still learning how to use them.
I know the feeling.
Yeah, but the bottom line is that when you're on the street using these devices, you're not aware of what's necessarily going on around you, and that can put you more at risk. And so what we're advising pedestrians to do, and bicyclists as well, is when you're in that environment of crossing the street or in the street, put those down. Take the earbuds out of your ears so you can hear and you can see.
That's right.
We also like to say establish eye contact. And it was pointed out that not always establishing eye contact doesn't guarantee you're going to be safe in that roadway setting, but it does give you what we call situational awareness. You're aware of what's going on, and we're encouraging pedestrians and bicyclists as well as drivers to be aware of the situation so that you can avoid hitting someone and causing a real tragic event to happen. And so that's part of what we're telling people. If in case you're driving, it's the law. You have to put that cell phone down, and and you're not to be driving around with earbuds in your ear. So the point is that this is an important issue that we think is increasing our collisions. We did find that we had an uptick a year ago in pedestrian collisions, and we thought that this distracted walking and driving could be a factor in that as well. So we're still analyzing data, trying to get our arms around this. I know that the National Federal Highway Administration, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration are both trying to see whether this is a factor that we can try to do something about or do what we call countermeasures to try to overcome that.
And we were talking about bicyclists earlier, too.
Yes.
And that's really, there are bike lanes, and at the same time, I've seen cyclists who don't want to use the bike lanes. And sometimes they can't because there is no bike lane, but there's just a narrow path. So how can we be a little bit more conscientious, if you will, about the bicyclists?
Deb, this is a very exciting time in Montgomery County because we are focusing on increasing our bicycle facilities in the county. We just brought in Capital Bike Share, which is the District of Columbia and
it's
Arlington
wonderful, yes.
have had. and that will be expanding in the coming year or two. And so because of that, we believe that we're going to see a significant increase in the number of bicycles on the road. And that's why it's so important that people be aware as they start to bicycle and drivers start to encounter bicycles, that they understand that bicycles, when they're in the road, they have a right to be in the road, but
That's
they need
right.
to be traveling with traffic, not against traffic.
Not against traffic.
We also advise them that when they're riding their bikes along parked cars, so they should be, basically 3 feet out, so that if the car door starts to open, they can avoid, being hit.
I've seen that happen before.
Yes.
It's not pretty.
It's not, and especially because some of these bikes can be traveling at a pretty good clip of speed. And so that can be a very bad accident when that happens. And then it's very important that bicyclists understand they need to obey the signals.
Yes.
I mean, it's sort of like, people think if you're on a bike, you don't necessarily have traffic laws that you have to obey, but that is not in fact true. You need to travel with the flow of traffic.
That's right.
You need to stop at the stop signs, and you need to basically be using hand signals so drivers know what you're doing, so they can make sure they're not going to turn into you or whatever. So there's a whole series of measures that we are trying to educate bicyclists about now as well, and that is part of this campaign. And again, the issue of visibility is also important, because a lot of times people may be riding their bikes back when it's dusk or even becoming dark, and again, it's very hard for drivers to see them in that setting. So it's very important that they use lights when they're out there when the darkened conditions are there.
This is 1450 WOL, Montgomery Mosaic, with your host, Deb Milo. I've got Jeff Dunkel here, Pedestrian Safety Coordinator with the county's Department of Transportation. And he's really talking about the importance of drivers looking out for pedestrians and cyclists. And folks, I really hope you're tuning in and listening, because this is a great subject matter. We talked a lot, Jeff, about what our responsibilities are. Can you talk a little bit about what role does law enforcement play in keeping people walking and biking safely?
Well, that's a real good question, Deb, because that is a big part of our Street Smart campaign. When we do the education campaign, we couple it with the enforcement. And we've found in Montgomery County that when those two are coupled together, that we see significant reduction of collisions. The police are now, they have enforcement teams that are going out on the street in Montgomery County, as well as the region. And they're issuing citations when people are breaking the law, and that means not just the pedestrians, not just the drivers,
right,
but everybody. And so in Montgomery County, if you are jaywalking, you could have a $50 fine.
I just found that out, not because I had it happen, but I just found it out from someone. They were telling me about that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and we think it's very important that the pedestrians need to be obeying traffic laws. And what that means is that when we have two signalized intersections within a block of each other, you're required to cross at that signalized crosswalk. You are not allowed to cross in what we call mid-block. Now, if there is a cross street that is not signalized, then you have the right to cross there, but you are required to yield to the cars in those settings. So that's an important designation that the police are enforcing now. But more importantly, or perhaps just as importantly, is that the drivers need to be stopping for the pedestrians in these crosswalks. And when the light changes in an urbanized setting and people are making a right turn or a left turn, they need to yield to the pedestrians who are in the crosswalk, because we do find that we have way too many collisions happening as a result of drivers not yielding to pedestrians in the crosswalk.
And that's just dangerous, to say the least, when you've got people, because I've been in a situation where I've been going down the road and we've got one of those, it's marked by lights, it's marked by signs that pedestrians are crossing, but I've seen people just whiz through there as the pedestrians, and they have to stop in order to let the car go through. And the pedestrian should be crossing, not the car.
Absolutely, and I will tell you that in Montgomery County, we're doing what we call crosswalk stings, where we have police officers who are our pedestrian decoys, if you will, and they're out there looking like regular pedestrians, and they are crossing the street. And if the car does not stop for them, then their colleague a block away is going to pull them over and issue them a fine. Citation, and the fine is $80. But more importantly, it's also 1 point on your license. So you will also be paying a fine for several years after that to the insurance company.
You better believe it,
because you had a point on your license. So that's how it's so important that the drivers be stopping for the pedestrians in the crosswalk.
Listeners, this is Montgomery Mosaic with Deb Milo, having a great conversation about pedestrian safety. And listen up, because Jeff Dunkel's here to really give us some good information about how we can be safe with the upcoming season. So what should people be aware of when they're walking from place to place, especially drivers? You know, sometimes when you're out and you're just out and about, it's a beautiful day, you're not really, aware, and you should be aware. What is it that we do need to be aware of when we're walking from place to place?
Well, the issue is that when you're crossing the roadway where the vehicular traffic is, that's when you're at risk. And so it's very important that whenever you are coming to those crossing environments, that you basically need to put away your cell phone, put it down, take the earbuds out of your ear,
right, and
look at the traffic. Look left, look right, look left again. Because sometimes when you've looked right, you may have something coming from the way of traffic,
That's
the
right.
way traffic's traveling. So we try to give them that left, right, left advice. And we like to say establish eye contact so you know that the drivers are there.
You did mention
and you're
that,
aware
yes.
of that. So that's what we advise people to do when they're in that crossing environment. Now, does that mean you have to only walk, without earphones or no.
Whatever they call them?
That's right. If you're basically not crossing the road and you're just on a trail somewhere or away from traffic, not as big of an issue, and you can be more careful. However, Deb, I will tell you that we have found in Montgomery County that we have something like 24% of all vehicular collisions are actually in parking lots. And that really surprised us. It was actually even higher than that 2 years ago. And we've had a campaign this last year to try to raise people's awareness of being careful in parking lots. But you might think that that's a safe place to be, that cars are actually traveling more slowly, and that therefore you don't have to worry as much. Well, the fact is that cars are coming from every which way when you're in a parking lot. And we do find that we can have some pretty serious collisions and have even had pedestrian fatalities in parking lots. So you need not let your guard down. If you're going to be around moving traffic, this is the advice, and this is the way to be safe. If you're around moving traffic, whether crossing the road, in a parking lot, or anywhere where cars are moving, you need to be paying attention to the cars and attempt to avoid being hit. Likewise, when vehicles are moving, you need to be very aware of pedestrians and bicyclists and make sure that you're not going to put them at risk. And if you're passing a bicycle, give them at least 3 feet of clearance so that you're not going to risk, hitting them when you're passing them.
Well, Jeff, needless to say, this has been a great source of information. And I understand that the best website to visit is www.bstreetsmart.net. Is that correct?
That's correct. bstreetsmart.net is the link to our Street Smart campaign.
Okay.
And there's lots of good information there for everyone.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Tune in again next month, folks, on the second and fourth Wednesday of each month for another Montgomery Mosaic on 1450 WOL, WPRS HD2, and worldwide on WOLDCnews.com. Till next time, thank you, Jeff. Make it a positive and safe day.